Where did the building authority fund money come from? Simple. Where did it come from?
The building authority millage, the tax collection on your.
So we have a building authority millage.
Correct. It's designed to pay down the debt service on the bond issuance.
Buildings that we have.
The bond issuance. Well, particularly the bond issuance. So right now, there's bond issuances for the Fire Station 1, the courthouse, Sportsplex has some, although the Tifa is paying that particular payment because again, it's in the Tifa.
So is the old fire station there? No, that's BDA.
Well, and then as I said, the language in the last couple bond series that I think Mr. Riddle would have written back at that point in time would have kind of said any other projects. The walking path at Heritage Park was in one of those series.
So what you're saying is, and so for how many years we've just been taking that knowledge and putting it into the general fund? Is that my understanding?
Well, it was always in it was a general fund account, yes.
And
so
it's no
we kept it in
general fund account?
Correct, because it's a dedicated revenue for a specific purpose.
Okay.
So it's not general fund money.
No, but it was kept in general fund
Correct.
until now. And
Well,
now
we
have
took
how
that
much?
out 2 years ago. We took that out with Act 170.
How much do we have? 1.2?
How much do we collect
Money
annually?
we have.
Or how much do we have in fund balance?
And for the building authority fund, how much do we have? We've separated it out, right?
How much do we have?
How much money do we have in our hand?
1.4 is fund balance
1.4?
reserve.
Okay, I thought it was 1.2, that 1.4. Okay, fund reserve.
But there's more than that, obviously, because this year's expenses haven't finished. They turn to June 30. I think we just paid the bond series. We just paid the bond series. So we pay $2.8 million out of that fund for bond payments annually, as you see on the budget sheet I gave you under your glasses there.
But I think my point is, where are we gonna come up with enough money? We're gonna pay our bonds, we're gonna be paying what we've been paying.
That's an
We have
annual
very
collection.
little money, right. So how are we going to be able to afford to add another bill onto the payment?
Because the truth in taxation that was approved last week,
Okay.
we assess the tax to make those payments in the annual expenses. So the 1.4 is fund balance. That's not, we're pulling 170,000 into next year's budget to cover expenses for building maintenance, building and grounds maintenance. Because then we're not collecting that much. What's it, millage? Do you remember what the millage was set at? 2.4.
You have approved the millage to cover the debt payment and the maintenance.
When did we
Through the
cover a
building.
millage? When did we approve a millage? We approved a millage increase?
No, it isn't an increase.
It's what we always
just-
do.
No, at the last board, or the special meeting,
Right.
you approved the village, and part of that millage was the building authority.
Is that something new or is
No,
that?
that's the
okay,
same
right.
thing every year.
Right.
And that produces the enough revenue to pay the debt and maintenance. So this $1.4 million is, over the years, you've accumulated, you've levied, and you have not spent all of that levy, and so it's built up the fund balance. And so that fund balance is sitting there right now. So you'll get your tax levy in for this coming year to pay the debt, but you still have that 1.2 or $4 million in the fund balance.
I thought we didn't have any money last year to do any building improvements or anything, was what I was, that was what I thought. That's why I'm just curious, how now this year we have money, extra money to, not that I'm opposed to doing nice things. I just thought last year we were told we had no extra money to do any capital improvement, and that was something we need to work on.
Well,
And now
at this
we
point
do.
last year, we didn't because money had not been separated out into a separate account and
But you
had
could've
been,
separated it
had
out.
been spent.
You could have separated it out last year.
No, because we spent
We
it.
spent it.
No,
So
we
this year
didn't
you
spend
say.
it. It was spent.
Not
because
you, someone spent it.
it was spent because we're running a deficit. Our
But are we
cash
still-
flow's not keeping up. That's
okay,
why we
but
borrowed.
are we
water
still,
funds.
okay, there you go, but now aren't we still running a deficit? I have a paper right here.
But this money is now separated out into
Right.
its own separate account.
Oh, how, okay, okay, so if we separate it, we're not in a deficit as much, but if we keep it in the
It
general
has
fund, we're in
nothing
a
to do with this
deficit.
account. The deficit has nothing to do with this account. The deficit is related to general fund.
If we hadn't separated it out, that money would have been in the general fund.
But it still would have been segregated. for
Right, and if
purpose.
we'd been spending it, we would have still been isolated by the auditors for spending
Dedicated money.
Dedicated.
revenues.
And I'm not saying we should have spent it for bills, I'm just, it's just odd that last year, though, we could have spent it on capital improvement last year.
You did have the cash though. You did have the cash set
How did we
aside.
get the cash this year, is my question, and when we're so poor all year, and we can't even make payroll, and now we've taken the money and put it in, we now have money to put in this account. But we couldn't make payroll last month. There you go, I mean.
But that's why you're borrowing from the general fund, I mean, from the water fund to the general fund.
We were
You're-
supposed to borrow last
You're restricted,
year.
you cannot use that, the restricted cash. And it's the cash, it's not the fund balance, it's the cash that we're talking about. You cannot use that cash
No.
without being written up and being in violation of
Well, how could we
state
do it
law.
last year? Why did we, why
You
did we
did,
do
and you
it?
have an audit finding that says you were wrong doing so.
Right,
You
I
can't do
understand
that.
we were wrong, but.
Right. And we actually, 2 years ago, we separated those accounts out during the budget process
Right.
with Jason and Dean. We
Right.
separated the money
I
out.
never talked about that.
Dean just didn't separate the money into its own separate account. It was still being collected and processed and handled through the general fund. He knew it was cash flow money. We just didn't have the money at the end of the fiscal year to make sure that those particular funds were flush.
But now we, this
So we
year
had
we
a
do.
specific audit findings that we did. When we repaid, when we balanced everything out, we made sure we pulled it out. We set up a separate account.
So now we
So
have.
that the money went when we had the money. So you wanted to borrow this? Pass a borrowing plan just like the water plan, so you can borrow these
I
funds
don't
and
want
use
to
it for
borrow
general
the
fund.
funds, Jeff, that's not, you know what, I'm not complaining about that we have the money, well, I'd like to know the process of how we created this money.
We did create
I
it.
mean,
We
it-
collected it, every year we
Right,
collected
okay.
it through tax collection.
But I'm sure you understand what I'm saying, last year, we should have been able to do the same thing, we spent it, whoever spent it, the year before, I don't know who spent it.
We talked about
Okay,
it.
that's
Mr.
fine.
Stapleton, Mr. Delo, Mr. Solers came, we went to the community center, we talked about doing it, we talked about the whole idea. The idea was, we didn't have cash flow, because the money wasn't actually there for this specific revenue to move forward
I
on a
do
project.
understand, and I'm not
The
playing
ring.
stupid, it isn't like I'm saying I'm not, I just am confused the fact that we were able within this last year, even though we should have done it, to put that money aside, as hard as things are, and as much as our deficit is, and I'm just surprised that we're able to
Yes,
do
go
it.
back at
I'm
the
not
beginning.
saying it's bad, I'm just wanting to, trying to
Back at
figure
the
out in my
beginning,
mind how we.
between September
were
and
able to do
December,
this.
when we're cash flush, when we have,
Right,
we've done all our tax collection,
right.
that's when we separate out
So you
into
separated
accounts
in September.
while we
October.
had the money, and
Okay.
why we didn't have any money when we hit March.
Okay.
Because we didn't have any special revenue funds.
So, like, okay, so, maybe that answers my question. So last year, when we thought we were gonna need to borrow the money, Dean didn't separate it, so that money was still there, so we were able to use that rather than borrow the water fund money.
Partially, yes.
Okay, see, do you see what, I'm just trying, in my mind, to figure out how we were able to do this.
Right.
And last year, we didn't need to borrow from the water department, so I'm confused as how, I know we're poor, but we came up with the money, so now that makes sense. So we didn't separate the year before, but we did it this year. So now we truly need to borrow from the water department, so the money goes where it's supposed to go in the capital improvement.
Well, that's, yes, that money is there, that's,
I understand.
In a bank account.
Wasn't, I just wanted to understand what we're doing.
and some of the struggles, I think, when people look at the balance sheets and see, we've done this in negotiations too, people will look at the balance sheet and see $8 million of fund balance and say, well, you're not out of money, you got $8 million fund balance. None of that money is general fund money, they're all special revenue accounts.
And I do understand, but that
Sitting
answered
in
my
there, so-
question. I just need to know how the process happened, that we were able to put the money where it belonged. And now that made it plain. That's all I need to know.
So we did what we were not supposed to do last year.
Well, we somewhat did the year before, and it wasn't as clear cut because the money, it wasn't, we weren't 5 million in the whole, we were 1.7.
Okay.
So the audit from 11 says, it appears you may have borrowed money that was dedicated revenue, and you shouldn't be doing that. It
Right.
was pretty clear when we we're then in a deficit $3.5 additional million that you hadn't replaced that money where it needed to be, because it was never separated out into a special revenue account. So we didn't want to get to that point again this year,